Welcome to Signals and Stories. I'm Robin Legasic.
And I'm Kelly Miller. This is the podcast where we unpack the signals shaping our industry and the stories shaping us. We're going to dive into a topic on today's episode, interview a guest on it, and finish up with hot takes and headaches.
And on today's episode, we're going to be discussing AI. And yes, I know it's almost been overdone already, but we're looking at it from the angle of retail and retail media. And I promise you'll learn something new today. Joining us today will be Dietrich. He is a recognized leader in digital transformation, retail media, commerce, and AI strategy. Throughout his career, he has helped brands, retailers, publishers, and technology organizations navigate major shifts in consumer behavior and emerging technology. Today, much of his focus is on helping organizations understand the impact of AI, from agentic commerce and retail media to evolving relationships between brands and consumers. Derek has a unique ability to connect what's happening in technology with what marketers need to do about it. And we are excited to have him join us a little bit later.
But first, let's dive into Landscape Pulse. Okay, on today's topic, we're going to talk about something that is impossible to ignore right now, and that's AI. And no, we're not going to spend the next 45 minutes talking about how to generate prompts or make better social media posts.
Right, because while most marketers are still focused on AI as a productivity tool, a much bigger shift may be happening beneath the surface. For years, marketing has been built around influencing customer decisions and consumer decisions. We build awareness, we shift and shape perceptions, we influence consideration, and ultimately, we hope to drive a purchase. But Kelly, I'd love to ask you a quick question. If I told you that 5 years from now, your online purchases would be done and influenced by AI recommendations or an AI agent, would you believe it?
Definitely not. But I would say in the last year, 6 months, that has changed so quickly. And my answer is absolutely different. What I find really interesting is consumers have adapted to using AI for purchase decisions so quickly. And sometimes, we talk a lot in this podcast about transformation, and that can take a long period of time. But this happened really seamlessly and really quickly. I think we saw consumers, change in the e-commerce era from going in store and talking to sales representatives to more researching online. And then there was ratings and reviews that they could, investigate and find things, as well as influencers. And I think consumers with those things always really felt like it was a trustworthy person that was giving them advice, that was trying to persuade them into a purchase decision. And now they've really just handed that over to technology and AI really seamlessly. And it does seem like AI is the new influencer in some ways. And that is continuing to evolve. And it's going to go right through, I think, for the full consumer journey.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where things get super interesting because if AI and AI agents are part of the decision-making process, or even get to the point where an AI agent is making the decision for you, I think that marketers and brands need to start asking different questions. How does a brand actually get discovered? Where do the recommendations happen? How do they happen? How do you build trust with a consumer when it's AI doing some of these things for them? And maybe most importantly, who are we actually marketing to?
It's absolutely true. And I think another great thing to look at here is within the retail media space and the retail media networks, because, they've really, in the last decade, become much bigger in terms of media and advertising and how they're reaching consumers. And really, retail media networks have become media companies, and media companies have become data companies. And increasingly, value isn't just in the advertising, space, but really in the data inventory that's within those spaces.
For sure. And I think that's exactly it. Historically, brands have paid for access to attention from those consumers in various different ways. And I think tomorrow and even, starting now, they're starting to pay for access to the signals instead.
Right.
And retailers and publishers that can provide that accurate product information, inventory availability, pricing reviews, customer behavior data are going to become more valuable in this AI-driven ecosystem.
100%. And what's interesting is the convo really isn't about AI itself necessarily, but one that we keep talking about. And it's about consumer evolution and change and how that behavior can really change how people act and shop overall. When the technology changes, that consumer expectation changes with it, and we've seen it across so many things. We saw it with the emergence of social media or streaming, and now we're seeing it with AI.
Yeah. And I think that the brands that win won't necessarily be the ones with the biggest AI budgets per se, but they'll be the ones that understand that consumers are changing and that they're going to adapt accordingly. And I think that's why I'm so excited to have Derek here with us today because he is an expert in this space and he can really help us unpack some of this.
That's going to be an interesting interview. I think we should get into it.
Hmm. Derek, welcome to Signals and Stories.
Thank you.
You've been at the forefront of retail media, commerce, digital transformation, and now AI. Before we jump into the topic, though, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. As I've been thinking about my career, feels to me a little bit like Groundhog Day right now. Because when I first came into the industry, it was at the time of kind of the e-commerce era. So it just started. E-commerce was just taking off, still burgeoning, and there's lots of model disruption. There's lots of technology advancements. And we find ourselves in that same place today with kind of this agentic era. And so, really, the early part of my career was traditional marketing roles, loyalty roles, analytics roles at e commerce companies. Mid career, moved more into financial services and building out programs for retailers. And kind of through that, that's where I kind of developed a passion for retail
Hmm.
and how I loved working with retailers. And I'd say over time, my roles have transitioned to much more technical. So, running mobile app program for Sobeys for quite a while, building out part of the leadership team and launching their e-commerce program when COVID hit. And so as I looked back at my career and thought about kind of what's the next chapter, I was trying to think about, the evolving trends in technology. How do I future-proof my career? And how do I find something that is changing every day? And kind of this opportunity within the company I'm at today kind of came about and it was an easy move for me. And so maybe just to give your listeners a little bit perspective. So the company I work at, EXL, we help companies build out their data layer and so that they can enable AI. So we really help them understand their data layer, and then on top of them, really figure out how to build out AI interventions across all of their workflows. And I focus on our CPG and retail space.
It's fun.
hmm If you said you wanted something that kept changing and growing, you definitely picked a path where that's happening for sure, because
Yeah,
there's so much changing in the space,
every
definitely.
day.
hmm
Yeah.
Okay, if we start with some basics here, we hear terms like AI agents or agentic AI, but how should marketers think about those two things? How are they different? Give us a little bit of the landscape and where that's at.
Sure. I'd say one is the building block of the other. So if you think of an AI agent, kind of what's its role and how does it work? So it's a piece of software where someone, either a human or a machine, gives it a goal. It's able to go out, collect data, research on its own, reason, come up with a set of possibilities, select the best one based on kind of the criteria you gave it, and it's optimizing for those criteria. And then if it's a full end agent, it's able to actually execute on whatever that end goal is. And so that's kind of the building block for agentic solutions. And so if you think agentic solutions, they're just more complex. Now you're bringing multiple agents together. You're figuring a way to orchestrate them. They're able to take on, I'd say, more complex entire workflows instead of just one simple, not simple, but one specific task. And so if we think about the evolution of agentic, and I don't think you need to get too hung up in the terms because we kind of use them interchangeably,
Mhm.
but we're going from a situation where an agent is really more about a specific goal and productivity gains, where agentic solutions can do that, but so much more in terms of it can go across functions in an organization and it doesn't necessarily have to have a specific designed goal at the beginning, but it can infer more broadly based on its knowledge across the organization to give you better returns, like better ROI, better productivity on the back end.
Okay, fascinating. And how is that being used in the retail media space right now?
Yeah, I'd say overall, in terms of marketing for retail, the three biggest use cases that we're hearing from our clients when we're talking with them are one would be around kind of agentic campaign optimization.
Okay.
So if you think about And I'd say, this is still building as a capability. And so where we are today is, typically an organization or a marketing team will give it a goal for a particular campaign, probably more digital based campaigns is this example. The agentic solution will be able to help recommend the best distribution or mix of media,
Mhm.
which channels, how much to invest, what the forecast is for the actual campaign, and then build out creative. Typically, right now, kind of more simpler creative. So whether you think banner ads or social copy or maybe personalized emails, things like that. Be able to optimize kind of real time through the campaign duration, and then at the end create analytics and insights, kind of all together in one platform or one solution. That would be one of the use cases we're talking a lot about. The next one would be personalization. So I think we've been talking about hyper personalization in the industry for a
Mhm.
long
Uh-huh.
time.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the bar keeps on moving as
Mm.
technology moves. So a lot of discussions and a lot of use cases on how do we improve relevancy and understanding customers and improve the personalization programs within retailers. And then the third would be agentic commerce.
Mm.
So, you know, um, how are agents now supporting consumers in their kind of purchase funnel? And at what stage is it coming in? How are retailers thinking about it? And how should they be preparing for that?
Mm.
Mhm.
So when we think about some of these shifts that are happening in AI, to me, I think it's like we're moving from tools that answer questions or can do these like basic tasks to automation and automated systems, and even as we think even further into more like autonomy. Um, so I'd love to hear when you're thinking about it in the space you're working, how the agentic systems help get us there, and where we see examples, or are we seeing examples of this kind of autonomy happening today?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail right on the head in terms of the horizons. Is kind of how we look at it
Mm.
too. So that first horizon is assistance, and you think about your typical first interactions with ChatGPT. It was really a question for your life, and it would spit out an answer, but the process would kind of end there. And so that has relevance in particular use cases, and sometimes you don't need to over engineer things.
Mm.
Um, the next level for us would be, or next horizon would be autonomous. And that's where you typically have like a defined workflow.
Mhm.
So the system knows what it's trying to accomplish and has several agents working. And it can accomplish that task either on its own or with humans as part of that process flow. And I'll talk about that in 1 second. And then that final horizon would be like a fully agentic system that has multiple workflows, may cross over many different functions within a retail or brand organization, much more complex in its execution. I'd say where we're seeing the majority of the activity today would be kind of in that middle layer.
Mhm.
I think organizations understand that assistance layer, and that's helping drive some productivity. It's helping drive productivity gains. But that middle layer is, I think, both where organizations are becoming more ready for, but also from a change management and people
Mhm.
perspective, that layer is becoming much more recognizable for people in organizations, and they're becoming more comfortable with that layer. We don't see today, at least in the space that we're in, like we're talking retail, CPG, a lot of capabilities yet in that fully autonomous, really complex agentic orchestration layer. I think we'd love to get there sooner
Mhm.
with our clients, but there's a lot of, I think, structural things that limit that, and we're helping them through those pieces today.
Mhm.
Um, and so you can define them across those three kind of horizons, but even within those, I think there's subsegments. So we talk about, and what the industry talks about is kind of in the loop, on the loop, and out of the loop for people within those workflows. So if you think of in the loop, you have an agentic system. At some point in that workflow, it's going to pause and need some input from a human,
Mhm.
and that's probably all the output that it's producing. And I think that's kind of early systems, and that's still a lot of the work today. As people start to trust the systems get smarter, technology advances, we're kind of moving now into human on the loop, where you've had enough time with whatever solution you have. You know where it's really strong. You know where it needs to develop still. And so now you're setting guardrails, parameters around, okay, what can the system do on its own
Mhm.
versus what do I need to kick out to human?
Mhm.
And so you can have, more of the complex decision making or more um, decisions that might be riskier for an organization, kicking out to human for decisioning, and some of those basic things that are high flowing, fast decisions, lower risk can go right through the system. And then finally, that, kind of that end goal of out of the loop would be kind of all the way on the right hand side of the spectrum in terms of automation.
Mm. I want to ask a little bit about sort of talking about the workflows. Um, are you seeing where people are redefining workflows in order to then have these systems and these, AI agents and agentic AI operate to the best? Or are we still in a place where we're using current workflows and figuring out how to
Mm,
input?
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And I know
I'd
that.
say that, yeah, I mean, there's a mix and it depends on kind of where the individual organization is on their journey. I'd say kind of our guidance would be through implementation of kind of more of those less autonomous systems, you're going to get maybe one, 2, 3, 4, 5x return
Mhm.
on your investment. Where we see the real value is that when you are transforming workflows with AI kind of at the core of that transformation, that's when you're going to start seeing those really big ROIs, 10x, 20x,
Mhm.
50x type of returns. I think the other thing organizations are really thinking about now is moving from this world of kind of POC, which is about a year ago. I think everyone is trying to figure out, okay, what does AI mean to us as an organization? What can it do? How are we going to organize ourselves around this space? And what we're really seeing, kind of leadership teams, executive leadership teams focused now on is I don't want to hear about POCs. I want your guidance on where can we drive real ROI that's scalable for us based on where today we are in our foundation.
Mhm.
And that foundation layer is the sticking point for a lot of organizations today.
Mhm. Mm.
Mhm. It is quite the scale, I think, where people and marketers are on in terms of their journey with this. From your perspective, where do you think Canadian marketers are in the CPG space in this sort of maturity level and their willingness to deploy some of this technology as well?
Yeah. So I'd say not just in Canada but globally, I think it's still really early
Mm.
structurally for brands and retailers and many organizations. Um, if I think about readiness from a few different angles, I've seen some recent research where I think 81% of Canadian marketers are using AI. But on the flip side, about 70% of those people are still checking everything AI does.
Mhm.
So you're getting some of those efficiency gains. And what that speaks to me is that there's this trust layer that's still building, change management and trust layer that's still
Mhm.
building. So the technology is advancing, company's infrastructure is advancing, which is critical to create the models that produce the right outputs that then people can then trust
Right.
and then rely on more autonomously. So I think it's early, but I think my guidance would be it's now's the right time that you need as marketers to be really thinking and working with your technology teams on building out the foundation.
Mhm.
So if your data isn't AI ready, then everything else you want to do on top of that's not going to
Right.
work. And that's where I think a lot of the POCs have fallen down is that you built POCs on a small data set that's not production grade, and then you go to roll it out and you don't get the same results because the organization isn't ready.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's kind of where we are today. I think so, like, to kind of wrap that, I think the ambition is there, but it's a bit ahead of the foundation today.
Right. I would say too, you said, it's a large percentage of marketers using AI, but I would say that there's probably a gap from how they're using it, within everyday work versus how they're implementing it into retail media
Yeah.
strategies or however else they're using it. Yeah.
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 Mhm.
Yeah, and we've talked, actually in a couple of previous episodes, about that building the foundation in terms of your data. and how important that is to successful implementation of AI and making sure that it has the right inputs as well, because otherwise you can find yourself in a very specific use case and then you can't expand even beyond that. So I think, it's definitely a good point to uh, sort of put a pin in for people to really think about what that foundation looks like
Yeah.
before they start to get too far ahead of themselves,
Yeah.
for sure.
And it's that data layer and it's everything that wraps around it. So it's your governance,
Hmm.
it's kind of your concept AI control planes, it's, having the right orchestration, observability, guardrails, all of those pieces around that foundation that are important. Um, and I think also, where's I going to go with this? So, yeah, building out that foundation is important, but also really thinking about those workflows and narrowing down the big lists of use cases that you might
Hmm.
have as an organization
Hmm.
and really trying to figure out, where are the big wins um, that we're going to deploy our capital against now,
Yeah,
where you need to really still, in many senses, prove the capability to the broader organization and the people that are going to be using it every day.
yeah, yeah, definitely. One of the concepts that you touched a little bit on earlier was the agentic commerce concept.
Mhm.
And to me, that's sort of the idea that AI eventually is going to shop on behalf of the consumer. Like that's the
Mhm.
sort of future, or, what does that actually look like today? Or is that
Mhm.
happening?
Yeah, I'd say I'd break it up into a couple different components of agentic commerce, and I how you described it generally is perfect. I'd say if you think about kind of the top end of the funnel and search itself for commerce, and whether that's on a retailer's site, and we're talking retail media, or more broadly on a search engine or through an answer engine or an LLM, the concept of keywords is really changing to more natural language, if
Mhm.
you want to call them prompts. And so I think a lot of the work in the industry today is trying to figure out how do I translate those prompts into how I'm going to surface products or services as a response to that prompt. So that's one, I think, fundamental change. And we can talk a little bit more on some of the technical aspects of that maybe in a bit. But then I think there's really two layers. There's kind of the research layer of e-commerce or agentic commerce, and then there's the transactional layer. And where we see the most activity today would be in that research layer. Um, the answer engines are really good at that. I don't know if you've ever asked ChatGPT or Claude what it knows about you.
Mhm.
If you haven't, you'll be really surprised on what it knows and what it can infer about you. And so having that kind of first party data within those search engines really allows it to, curate a list of recommended products.
Mhm.
But there's still a lot of work in that layer for retailers and brands to do because those answer engines are really looking for all the signals from those retailers and brands.
Mhm.
So not just what the color and shape and size of an item is, but what is its availability? What are its product reviews? What are your customer service hours in case they have an issue? What are your returns policies? Like the answer engines, depending on what you tell it, are going to be optimizing across all of those different characteristics.
Mhm.
And if they don't have that data from you, they're not necessarily going to trust you as a product or a brand. And someone who has that full range of robust, constantly evolving current data is going to show up further in the search.
Mhm.
Um, so, so I think that's where the majority of the work today, and again, that comes down to foundations. I think there's a stat from McKinsey that they're estimating that agentic orchestrated commerce will be about $1 trillion in the US in about four
Wow.
years.
Holy moly.
So if
Hmm.
you think it, so that's 15% of retail sales in the US, and that's in 4 years. Like it took a
Crazy.
long time
Mhm.
for e-commerce to get to
Yeah.
15%. Projections,
Yeah. Yeah. Things can
but
change.
I think what that does demonstrate, and I think we all feel it in our own lives, is that you are turning more and more to those answer engines for your
Hmm.
search and to help, at least right now, narrow the list.
Yeah.
On the transaction layer, we're seeing, I think there's still a lot of uncertainty there. So if we think about the timeline, Walmart launched one of the first fully agentic funnels in October of last year, where they built the transaction layer directly in a chat GPT. And from everything that I've seen that they publicly released, And consequently, how they've moved their strategy is that they weren't getting the conversion um,
Hmm.
through that solution design because customers saw Walmart as the brand that they trust and the retailer
Yeah.
they
Right.
trust, and their willingness to give the control and their financial information over to the answer engine or over to ChatGPT wasn't there,
Not knowing where that's going to end up.
not knowing where it's going to end up. And so they've evolved, and ChatGPTs and Google and some Shopify have all kind of moved towards more of a kind of in-app experience
Hmm.
where the research can happen there. You can even create a checkout or a shopping list within the LLM, but then it pushes to the retailer for
Hmm.
actual transaction. You can do cross sell, upsell through the kind of that
Hmm.
transaction funnel. And so still early there. I think the one interesting, exciting data point that I've heard recently is that I think Loblaw's Digital released a couple stats where are they saying that the traffic in that channel has increased 4x, small base, but still tremendous growth. And it's their second highest conversion channel next to their digital flyer. So, they're seeing real gains and real positive results by building out their agentic commerce capabilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does feel like the adaptation by consumers for the research level of AI happened really quickly. So, in some ways, it does feel like brands must be feeling like they need to keep up with that right now. And if we think about that a little bit further, brands have spent a long time, like historically, over a long period of time, working on how they're creating a connection with the consumer, and a lot of that is through at an emotional level, you know what I mean, and keep that brand stickiness.
Oh.
With AI coming into the picture in this research level, how do you think that that's changing things and shifting how brands need to approach consumers differently?
Yeah. Give you a few thoughts around that. So one, like I think consumers will always want to connect with a brand somehow, particularly for higher consideration purchases.
Mhm.
Like there's going to be a need, and there's something that's drawing them to a brand and buying a particular item, and so that's not going to go away. We're also, talking about um, customers are still going to go in a store. They're still going to have exposure to all these other channels and services that are influencing their purchase decision.
Mhm.
That's not going away for a long, long time. Um, and so I think that the brand piece, the emotion building, the connection with the consumer is still critically important for brands. So I think maybe their thinking will evolve is they can't they can't just show up in the messaging, but they really need to be machine legible because your first interaction with a brand or for a brand, your first interaction with a consumer actually might be through a machine.
Mhm.
And so,
Right.
how do you show up there and how do you connect the dots to how you're showing up in your media and all of your marketing communications? I think what's still really early is what the economic model looks like and the data model looks like between the answer engines and the brands and
Right.
retailers.
Mhm.
And that first party data, we just talked about, how much the LMs know about you and that first party data they have, the retailers all have great loyalty and first party data they
Mhm.
have. And how are those two going to come together to make the experience better for the customer? That's still, I think, super early days, and everyone's trying to figure out what that looks like.
And you talked about personalization earlier. That feels like personalization on a whole different scale, right? A different
Yeah,
level. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
Mhm.
yeah.
Definitely. So if you're talking to like the CMOs, for example, of these organizations,
Mhm.
or either the brand or the retailer, how are you advising them in terms of how to prepare for this shift to agentic commerce?
Sure. I'd say the first message is don't wait. Like today is almost too late to start, but start today.
Hmm.
Um, and probably four dimensions right now. So, or four areas to look at. So one is really treat your product and your commerce data as kind of strategic assets. So make sure you invest in them. Make sure you're building. If you think about product pages, all right. So I can't name how many times I still go to a website and I search a product and there's no nutritional information, or I'm on, a home improvement site and I'm trying to figure out if this trailer hitch is going to fit into my car, and like the dimensions aren't
Mhm.
there and the scale isn't there. And so like all of those are key signals, and that's a lot of the work we're doing with clients today and helping improve their product information. The good news is that there are a lot of agentic solutions that can actually help accelerate that. But treat your product data as a strategic asset, invest in it, keep it current. Two, really think about how you're making yourself visible to the machines across your entire ecosystem. So thinking about how you're changing every surface so that it's readable
Mhm.
by the machines or by AI. But also really now, and kind of in the third theme, is thinking about as an organization how you're structuring yourself more cross-functionally. Because if you think
Mhm.
about, y- traditionally the consumer, that's a marketing thing. They're responsible for bringing them in the front door and getting conversion, and then supply chain and merchandising and marketing. But supply chain or customer service is a little bit off to the side. And now, as we talked about earlier, the machine wants to see all the signals across all of those pieces. So everyone needs to be lined up behind, the core strategy, be at the same technical or foundational level so that all of those signals can flow and you're creating more trust and more consistency with those agents that are searching your site or your mobile app or coming
Mhm.
in through other channels or surfaces. Um, and then I think four would be, and we're seeing a lot of this developing already, but really get your analytics layer in place for agentic. So really understanding what your share of voice is through agentic search, understanding kind of what type of prompts are being used for your organization. So really building out that analytical layer so you
Mhm.
really understand what's happening in your business, and then you can read and react and build strategies from that. But still early days, I think, for organizations building out that
Mhm.
capability. So I think those would be overall the four kind of key messages.
Mm. Cool.
Mhm.
That's great. We've touched on this a little bit already, but I want to do a bit of a deeper dive into it in terms of the retail media networks because there's been so much change and so much growth within retail media and media itself and their network's approach to media and inventory. And a lot of it typically had been built around the inventory, shopper attention, different things like that. And how are you seeing AI change that value proposition of retail media specifically? And does the value shift in data and signals powering the AI change with that?
Yeah, I definitely think the signals and the data are really going to power more of that. So maybe two sides to think about. So one is a concept around search and how search has evolved from keywords to now more prompt natural language based. And so a lot of the work we're seeing in the industry and we're spending time is really transitioning from associating keywords to particular products or
Mhm.
services and moving towards, I think the industry term is kind of intent clusters. So now you're trying to think about, what are the prompts that are most likely going to be related to this particular item. So before, this chair, you used to search, I need a chair for a podcast. It needs to be professional looking. And then you get, I think, 10 pages of results.
Mhm.
Um, Now you're thinking about, you know, your prompts are going to be, I need a brown chair to go with the interior. It needs to be delivered by X date. It needs to be able to, live for 10 years because I'm going to have posts or, I'm going to have podcasts for that long. And so trying to think about and develop all those kind of intent clusters is, is tremendously complicated and,
Mhm.
a very big task for our technical teams. But that's kind of way that the industry is moving. And so with those intent clusters, you still need all those other signals that we talked about to make sure you're surfacing the
Right.
most relevant ad or impression to the consumer. So you drive
Mhm.
that end conversion.
Mhm.
And so consumers' expectations on what's going to be presented them will evolve because they're used to getting more relevant kind of end-to-end recommendations based on their individual set of criteria or I guess, criteria that they want to maximize against. And so I think as the industry evolves, it'll be interesting. And I know there's concern around disintermediation between, having the search engines produce a very short list or a recommendation and then sending a customer directly to the checkout flow. And then you miss all that opportunity within your site.
Right.
So that's, I think, an evolving conversation. But I think the flip side is there's still going to be tons of traffic coming to your website. You still have great opportunities even through that checkout flow to interact with customers. That there's still going to be tons of value there, and consumers still want to have that end connection with the retailer or the brand at the end of the day.
Mhm. Definitely.
Mm, yeah. So when we think about that, how does the loyalty programs then fit into that? And where does that either help or hinder?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, I don't think it hinders. I think again, kind of looking at two different sides. So that concept we talked about where the answer engines or the LLMs know a lot about you and have first party data, that whole how do we share, how do we work together as a retailer and a hyperscaler, if you want to call them that, that's still kind of to be defined. On the loyalty side, I'd say just that evolution of personalization is kind of the key element. So, before a lot of the signals you get were based on historical purchase data. Maybe you get some surveys, maybe there are a few things that you understand about the customer that you're adding into that profile. But now with the evolution of technology and the LLMs, we're really able to do a couple things. So one is really start to look more at real-time signals or near-time signals. So what did you look at on my website this morning, or what was in your basket in the last hour? What's the weather going to be like tomorrow? If you're thinking kind of like grocery landscape, or even home improvement. And so there's many more signals that we're going to be able to bring in. And you're also going to be able to infer a lot more through the LLMs based on that data about a customer. You're going to need to put guardrails around that. You're going to need to be careful on what the final output is and really make sure you're comfortable with that. But I think just the amount of information that we can know about consumers is increasing, and the way that you can operationalize that to make the experience better is important. I think, and maybe not directly related to loyalty, but I think an interesting area that would be interesting for the listeners is an area of token optimization. And I'll talk to why it's important to marketers kind of at the end. But so tokens, essentially, if a token is essentially the currency of AI today. So you put in a question into an LLM, that LLM company has a methodology that says this sentence is worth 3 tokens, and they charge you for those 3 tokens. The output also gets broken into tokens. They charge you for the output. And so token optimization is now a huge, I think, conversation topic among product teams and technology teams on how do we optimize that. And so there's a lot of really interesting ways. So you can be thinking, like when we're talking about personalization, loyalty, you can think about, what characteristics do I know today versus I don't? What do I need an LLM to infer versus what can I do, what can be deterministic? If I'm using an LLM, do I need to do real time or can I do batch? One's more costly than the other. Do I need the latest model, or does an older model suffice for whatever the use case is? And then I think finally, where we're seeing a lot of traction is building out what we call like small language models. So they would be models that are built specifically on the retailer's data. You might pull in some components from a larger language LLM for certain aspects, but you're building this model specifically out of your data. And what we're seeing is you can have much better cost effectiveness. You can have much better performance and accuracy because it's built on your data, and it gives you more of a competitive advantage than necessarily using the broad models. And so why that's important to marketers is as you're seeing opportunities with customers and asking things from your product teams and your technology teams, that aspect is so important, the overall ROI of the program. And now measurement is not just, what's happening with the customer, but what is the kind of total cost of ownership or total return on the investment, both up front as well as technology supporting it.
yeah, definitely. I think that goes back to when you were talking about earlier around ROI on AI investment and AI implementation, I think there's a lot of people who don't necessarily understand what goes into actually building AI agents and agentic AI and the token aspect of it and the like accessing the LLMs and accessing and building that out. There's a cost to that. And so therefore, as much as you're trying to find efficiencies through your process or, in people, um, you need to think about how you're going to be efficient
Yeah.
in your leveraging of tokens when you're building AI for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And I think that's, kind of that concept of moving from POC to scalable
Hmm.
implementations is where a lot of pilots have fallen down. That's
Yeah,
just part of learning. Like
yeah,
that just
and
naturally
yep.
happens as technology evolves. But I think that's something that we've been really steadfast in guidance to our customers. So, I think a stat is about 50 to 60% of AI pilots fail.
Yeah, seen that.
We're on the other end of that where we're seeing like 94% success rate in our
Great.
AI implementations. But a lot of that is because we will have the hard conversations with clients saying, okay,
Hmm.
is this the right use case? Is it going to drive the value that you're expecting? Do you have the foundations in place to support this at scale? And if you don't, then we need to put a pin in this now. And if that is the right use case, build out the infrastructure, change management, all the components you need to make it successful.
Hmm. I think when we talk about this, one of the questions I had for you is about the biggest opportunity for retailers and where we're seeing maybe mistakes that are being made and how those can be avoided. So I'm curious, is it in this conversation or are there other areas?
I think that it's in this
Yeah.
conversation. It's like it's scaling ambition faster than your capabilities, your foundation allows.
Hmm.
Right? You see great capabilities. Maybe your competitors are doing it. Maybe you had a great demo from a service company and you get excited about it. But you really need to really check in with your product and technical teams to really understand it. Can we support this today? And if not, maybe what are some of the concepts or capabilities of that solution that you can take in pieces today, get some value from it, understanding that your longer term vision is to get this, entire solution, but there are likely some components and ideas that you can take from that and operationalize based on where you are on your
Mhm.
journey.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more around the consumer
Mm.
aspect of things. So, we in our business, marketing, consumers are always looking for those relevant experiences. And I'd love to understand maybe, how AI is impacting that in the retail space and the importance of it. But I'm also going to sort of add in, if consumers are delegating decisions to AI, what becomes more important? Is it more important about the brand building or is it more important to focus on performance marketing?
Mhm.
How does, relevancy fit into that?
Mhm. Uh, I think to talk to relevancy, and we spoke a little bit earlier about, just being able to become even more relevant to consumers as you know more about them, um, as the technology evolves and you can communicate them through, or you can position yourself better through some of the answer engines. So I think relevance is just increase our ability to be more relevant to consumers is increasing. Um, I think how does that sorry, what was the second part of the question
So
was?
it's around like, I think about
Oh,
the brand building, right?
the
Like if,
brand
if
building.
we're
Yeah.
thinking about agentic commerce and we're thinking
Yeah.
about eventually, even if it's, in the future, decisioning being done by machines,
Yeah.
then, do brands still need to build brands or is it
Yeah.
more about shifting more into, like, performance marketing?
Yeah. I think a lot of it will come down to what category you're in and or we talk a little bit about kinda
Mhm,
high high confidence categories where the decision, um, is maybe high ticket
mhm,
or, really important to who you are as a person versus maybe a perishable good or
mhm,
a common replenishment item that you've been buying Coke your entire life. You just really wanna optimize for the cost and maybe delivery time.
mhm,
So I think it really depends on where you are on that spectrum. Again, I think brand building will, um, be continue to be a critical piece because of all the exposure you get to media across every surface that you interact with.
Mhm.
But it will change on you probably more focused on performance marketing for those low consideration categories and items and much more on those high consideration items. And for those and relevancy for both from a machine perspective, I think is still the same. Like the answer is still the same in terms of you need to deliver all the right signals to the machines to really interpret your brand and become legible to them so that no matter what surface you're interacting with the customer, they're always trusting your brand because they're either seeing it through your marketing or they have confidence in the answer engines to recommend you as part of their output.
Right. Mhm. As we talk about this sort of evolution with brands and brand building, um, if we look ahead to, let's say, 5 years from now, maybe, what do you think is going to be the biggest change? How will marketers and organizations look different
Yeah.
with what they're doing and trying to evolve with?
Yeah. So I think overall, I think, you know, the creativity, the customer empathy, understanding your customer, that that's not changing at all. I think where you'll see is structurally and skill wise, there will be an evolution. So I think structurally being able to interact more closely across all the functions is going to
Hmm.
become or is very important. I think data fluency and understanding your workflows to be able to translate that to your product and technical teams so they can build out those end-to-end workflow solutions that are based in AI will be extremely important. I think i- um, the analytics piece will continue to evolve and transition from dashboards to more conversational analytics, which marketers and their analytics teams will be critical for them to evolve their programs. I think, overall, just the technical skill set within marketing will increase because it's going to need to be able to support
Right.
both communicating to customers throughout all the channels we have today, as well more kind of more communication that's digital to actual machines.
Mm.
But I think that's how the organization will evolve over time. But I think the core capabilities of what marketing teams to do today will remain the same.
Mm. Mhm.
When you're thinking about the future, and you're thinking about AI, I'd love to hear, like, do you have a kind of crazy thought or prediction that, sounds crazy, but could actually possibly be when you look forward and see the trajectory?
I don't know if it sounds crazy, but I think something that maybe doesn't get talked about right now is that there's such a heavy distribution of the LLMs based in the US.
Mhm.
Right? All of the other than DeepSeek, all of the ones you hear about are based in the US. And I think what you just recently saw with the US limiting the use of one of the newest models to the international community, I think governments are really starting to think about kind of their own sovereignty and their own digital sovereignty. And that just is related with a whole bunch of other
Mhm.
geopolitical changes that are happening.
Yeah.
And so I think there's gonna be a second wave of LLMs that maybe are more regional specific, or you think
Mhm.
maybe the EO creates their own because they want more control. They don't want to be shut out if it ever came down to it. And so I think there will be an evolution in the LLM space. And what's important today, and as you think about the future, is making sure you're setting up your infrastructure and your workflows so that it can integrate and plug and play with any one of those
Mhm.
current LLMs or future LLMs,
Yeah.
so that you don't get limited.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, digital sovereignty and data sovereignty is something that we could probably have an entire podcast
Yeah.
episode on, but it is something that, more and more, governments and countries and, uh, organizations are starting to think about. Yeah,
Yeah,
so definitely.
yeah,
Um, I also think that we have guests like you who are very, technically knowledgeable. It's easy to focus on, you know, those things only, but behind every career is a person. And I'd love to hear, what the biggest piece of advice you've received over the years that has, shaped how you have approached innovation and change throughout your career.
sure. Maybe kind of three related concepts, and some of it's have been imparted on me. Some of it's just kind of through learning and hard knocks. And so I think, the first piece is really about, being comfortable, being uncomfortable. So, really taking risks through your career, whether that's in specific strategies or programs or just your own interpersonal and putting yourself out there and being vulnerable through your career um, and growing in that way. But on the flip side of that is really giving yourself grace when things don't go according to what your end vision was. Because you might have to pivot, you might have to completely stop and do something different. But that's just all part of the learning process. And I think organizations talk about being comfortable with taking risk, but really finding organizations and leaders that are and give you the space to do that is still, I think, far in between. Um, and then I think, um, kind of the last piece of that is like it too shall pass is kind of the concept. So whatever's happening in your life today, it's going to pass. And what real long term success is built on is like really true grit and resilience. So, how do you pick
Mhm.
yourself up? How do you learn the lessons through that journey? And how do you have more of a long term mindset on how you're building either your career or your skill set or you just as personal, like human development? So, it's kind of the combination of those three, all related, but I think are important at each stage of an experience.
Mhm. Well, life would be really boring if we just went on like an easy straight path forward, right? And never had to pivot or do
Really
any
push
resistance.
yourself and, like, the biggest lessons and this is, I'm not saying anything new, but, like, the biggest lessons are, when you don't necessarily get the outcome that you were expecting, but making sure you take the time to really digest that, dissect it, and take those lessons because you don't wanna make them twice.
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, we talked about what do you see coming 5 years? What do you see coming? Now I'm gonna flip it a little bit.
Okay.
Um, when people look back on this era 10 years from now, what do you think they'll say we focused on that didn't really matter?
Mm, I think the whole dialogue and discussion about no one's gonna have jobs in 5 years because the
Mhm.
computers are gonna take it all.
Mhm.
Um, I just I don't believe that. I look back at humanity. I have kind of this internal optimism that humans are adaptable and that we're always seeking some type of purpose. And we just don't know that we don't know the jobs that are going to be
Mhm.
developing over the next 5 to 10 years. There's certainly going to be a period of transition and difficulty and probably for another different podcast is how are governments, how are schools, how are corporations helping their constituents through that change. But uh, I can't envision a world where it's universal income and we're sitting around
Just doing
just
nothing. Yeah.
doing nothing and just chatting, right? Like the world will evolve, jobs will evolve, and I think we spend a lot of time thinking about the doomsday scenario today.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, and I love that we are going to be kind of closing off on a note of optimism. So I want to thank you very much for the time today. You're a wealth of knowledge in this space, and we appreciate your information and your insights. So thank you so much for being here with us today. If people do want to reach out, I would suggest that LinkedIn is likely the best place to start.
Yeah, that'd be great. Always open to conversations, dialogue. Love to hear different opinions, and just wanted to thank both of you. I love what you're doing with the podcast. It was a real honor and pleasure to be here today.
All right.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us and thanks for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. And up next, we have hot takes and headaches. Okay, great. And for our final segment, we'll do hot takes and headaches. And this is where Meg, our producer, fires some questions at us for rapid fire answers.
Alrighty, we're going to kick it off with our first question, Kelly.
Mhm.
Most marketers are overestimating the impact of AI in the next 12 months and underestimating it in the next 10 years. Agree or disagree?
I'm going to say a little bit of both. I think, based on our conversation today, I think that they might be underestimating consumer purchase behavior, and maybe overestimating how consumers are actually interacting with it and how they can utilize it. I think that a real key takeaway was for brands to understand how they can evolve within AI to reach consumers in a different way.
Robin?
Yeah, I think I would lean on the side of agreeing with that statement. But again, I think what we learned today, especially in talking with Derek, is I think what they're underestimating is what it takes to build the foundation
Mhm.
to support the consumer change and behavior.
Hmm. Okay, next question. Robin, AI agents will become more influential than brand websites. Agree or disagree?
Mm. I'm going to disagree because the AI agent needs to scrub the information from somewhere.
Hmm.
And again, what we talked about today is making sure that your site is ready to be read within the LLMs and within the by the agents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kelly?
I think that we've seen an overall different influence with consumers, just within a whole ecosystem because, we evolved from brand website to like something like Amazon where you can get the ratings and reviews and all those different resources. And I think that this is just an additional part of that ecosystem.
Mm. All right, next up, Kelly.
Hmm.
Traditional loyalty programs won't survive the agentic commerce era.
Oh, I think they'll survive. Absolutely. People love loyalty programs. They love the
Yes.
perks and benefits they get from them. I don't see that going anywhere.
Robin?
I agree with Kelly that they're not going anywhere. Too many people are, masters of points and knowing
Hmm.
exactly what
Mhm.
they need to get what to do what with, and there's a whole like subculture of loyalty program point utilization,
Yeah.
and I just don't see them going anywhere.
Yes, the people would riot.
Mhm.
Next question, Robin. Most personalization strategies today are just sophisticated segmentation. Agree or disagree?
Agree, 100%. Uh, Quite frankly, people don't really want personalization because it's creepy. They don't want to give up their personal information and their data to know that somebody knows them as an individual, unless they've already had a really deep relationship with that brand.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, yeah, for the most part, it's about cohorts.
Mm-hmm. Kelly?
I agree, but I also sometimes personally enjoy the convenience of it that, my shopping behavior knows that I have a dog and then, okay, so yeah, I need dog food. Oh, I was going to forget that. Thank you
Mm-hmm.
for for knowing that that's a need that I have. So sometimes I enjoy the convenience of it.
Yeah. Okay, last question, Kelly. Retail media networks will become data companies before they become media companies.
They're already both.
Hmm.
They already have the data, the consumer data, and that's why they've become so successful in the
Mhm.
last few years is because they've been able to marry the consumer data that they have alongside media offerings and really be able to create some good growth strategies and media opportunities for brands.
Robin?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, and I will go back also to one of the other episodes that we did where we talk about um, leveraging first party data and then enhancing that information and that data.
Mhm.
And I think that's where it
Mhm.
becomes even more valuable, and where the retail media networks can start to enhance a brand's first party data, or pull in publisher data with that, and you can get some really deep, robust insights on, different individuals and different segments within that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all of our questions for today.
Great. I really enjoyed today's conversation. I learned a lot. I mean, there's a lot I think that we already know and talk about in the world of AI and retail media networks. But the way that Derek can frame things to think about the future and how brands and organizations need to think about structuring themselves for success in the future, I think was very valuable.
Agreed. I think such a great episode for marketers
Mhm.
overall, especially in the CPG space and sort of what the future looks like for them. It was insightful.
Agreed. Well, until next time, I'm Robin Legasic.
And I'm Kelly Miller.
And that's a wrap.